My name is Daniel. I'm 38 years old. I live in Tacoma, Washington. And last Thanksgiving, my entire life unraveled in a room full of people who pretended to love me. I thought we were a family, but that night proved otherwise. It had been snowing lightly all morning, the air sharp enough to make your skin ache. My mom, Donna, had gone all out as usual. Turkey roasting since dawn, cranberry sauce from scratch, even those tiny pumpkin rolls she knew I liked. I spent most of the day helping her out in the kitchen, elbow deep in dishes and grease, while my two younger brothers, Trevor and Jake, cracked beers on the couch and watched football like they had been lifting the weight of the world all year. I've always been the one who stays, the one who does the errands, runs to the store last minute when the gravy needs more time, fixes the broken chair legs, and shovels the driveway when the snow piles too high. Never asked for thanks, just did it. Because family, right? Our dad, Ron, was in high spirits. He always got extra chummy after 2 drinks, slapping backs and throwing out jokes that made everyone laugh even if they weren't funny. The house was packed with cousins, aunts, and a few old friends from the neighborhood. I didn't mind the noise, it was home, it was what I knew. Dinner came and went. Plates emptied, wine bottles disappeared, and I was in the kitchen again, loading the dishwasher while everyone else migrated toward the fireplace. That's when Dad raised his glass and called for quiet. I dried my hands on a towel and leaned in the doorway, half curious, half exhausted. "Big news, everyone," he said, standing tall with a proud smile. "Next month we're taking a family trip. All of us. One big winter getaway. Colorado slopes, cabins, the works. Merry Christmas early." The room lit up. My aunt clapped. Jake high-fived Trevor. My mom was glowing. Even the kids were jumping in place like someone had just dropped free candy from the ceiling. I smiled, feeling a little spark inside me too. A break, a change. I hadn't left Washington State in over a decade, always tied down by family duty, work, bills that weren't mine, but I paid anyway. So I asked gently, "That sounds amazing. When do we leave? I'll have to shift my shifts around at the auto shop." The room didn't go silent. Not at first, but it got quieter. Enough to hear Dad's laugh crack with something colder than usual. He turned toward me, not with anger, worse, with pity. "You?" he said. "Oh no, Danny. This trip's just for the family." He grinned like it was a joke, but nobody laughed. My stomach tightened. "You'll stay back," Mom added with a shrug. "You're the most responsible. Someone's got a house sit. Watch the dogs, you know how it is." I didn't say anything, not at first. Just nodded slowly like maybe I'd misunderstood. But the looks on their faces, neutral, expectant, already past the conversation, told me I hadn't. Jake muttered, "Well, someone's got to hold down the fort," as if that made it better. I stood there with my back straight, still holding the towel, my hands going cold. And that's when something in me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a hairline fracture running across the center of a glass plate. These were the same people I'd bailed out over and over. The same brothers whose rent I covered when they partied their paychecks away. The same parents I drove to appointments, fixed leaky roofs for, made grocery runs at midnight when they forgot about holidays. Not part of the family. I'd been holding this family up on my shoulders like it was a duty. And now I was just, what? The help? I didn't throw the towel. I didn't shout. I walked out, past the fireplace, past the chatter that had resumed like nothing happened. I stepped into the snow without my coat, just my keys in hand, boots crunching through fresh powder as I climbed into my truck. I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I wasn't staying. The roads were slick, headlights carving out space between me and everything I was leaving behind. I didn't cry. That would have meant I was surprised. And deep down, maybe I wasn't. Maybe I always knew they saw me as something else. Convenient, predictable, replaceable. I drove until the houses thinned out, until the trees got taller, and the streetlights scarcer. I found a motel off the side of Highway 16, paid cash for a room that smelled like mildew and old smoke, and collapsed on the creaky bed with my boots still on. I stared at the ceiling, my breath visible in the cold, my chest heavy with something I couldn't name. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was hollow, and that scared me more than anything. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do next. I woke up before the sun, my back sore from the stiff mattress, and the hum of the heating unit rattling just above my head. There was nothing on the walls, No pictures, no warmth, just pale yellow wallpaper peeling at the edges. I sat up slowly, ran my hands over my face, and stared at the bag I'd packed sometime around 2 a.m. There wasn't much in it. A couple flannel shirts, my work boots, a screwdriver set I always kept nearby, and an old photo I didn't even remember tossing in, me, Mom, and Dad at some 4th of July fair when I was maybe 12. Before everything got so heavy, I didn't have a plan, just movement. I checked out of the motel before the lobby coffee had even brewed, and drove with no music on, just the crunch of my tires on icy roads and the faint sound of the wind pushing against the truck. I thought about turning back once, just once, but the thought of stepping into that house again with their half-smiles and excuses made my stomach turn. A few towns over I saw a sign, Redwood Bay, 24 miles. I remembered the name from a project we did in shop class back in high school. A sleepy town with a marina, a couple diners, and a population barely enough to fill a high school gym. Sounded perfect. By mid-morning, I was pulling into Redwood Bay. Fog hugged the coast and gulls circled above the docks like they were waiting for something. The town looked like a postcard faded from the sun. Old brick buildings, salty air, pickup trucks caked in sand. It felt untouched, like no one expected anything from anyone here. I found a small mechanic's garage tucked behind a laundromat. The sign read, Marlin's Auto, no fix, no fee. And the bay doors were open, a guy in a gray hoodie welding something beneath a rusted-out Jeep. I didn't know what I was hoping for, maybe a little purpose, a little peace. The guy looked up, pushed his goggles back and eyed me. You lost, stranger? Looking for work? I said. He laughed. You got a name? Daniel. Marlin, he replied, standing and wiping his hands on a towel. You ever work on carburetors older than you? Pretty much lived under a hood since I was a kid. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he jerked his head toward the garage. Tools are over there. Prove it. I didn't ask what the job paid. I just picked up a socket wrench and got to work. An hour later, I had the engine humming and Marlin nodding. You're hired, he said, tossing me a pair of coveralls that smelled like motor oil and dust. Don't screw up lunch orders and we'll get along fine. I didn't smile much that day, but I felt something loosen in my chest. The place was quiet except for the occasional honk from the docks and the buzz of welders. No family screaming over the remote. No brothers asking for money. Just me and busted metal that made sense. I got a room above a bait shop near the shore. It was small, just enough room for a bed, a chipped table, and a view of the water through a fogged-up window. Rent was cheap, paid weekly, no questions asked. I liked that. The days started to blend. Work at Marlin's from dawn to late afternoon, then long walks along the marina with coffee in a to-go cup and a head too full of thoughts. Nights were the hardest. I'd scroll through my phone out of habit, stare at the same 5 photos over and over, wondering if any of them noticed I was gone. A week passed. No texts, no calls, not even from Trevor, who used to blow up my phone every time his car made a noise he didn't understand. I guess they figured I'd come crawling back eventually. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe it was easier that way. On the 8th night, I sat on the edge of the dock, feet dangling just above the black water when I saw her. This woman with auburn hair and a paint-streaked jacket setting up a folding easel across from me. She didn't look up, just unpacked her brushes like it was second nature. Her focus was calm, like nothing could touch her. I watched for a few minutes. Finally, she glanced over. You staring or thinking about jumping? I blinked. Bit of both. She smirked. Well, do me a favor. Don't ruin the shot. The reflection's perfect tonight. That made me laugh for the first time in what felt like years. Real laughter. The kind that creeps up when you least expect it. She introduced herself as Riley, said she painted local landscapes for extra cash and taught art part-time at the middle school. We talked for a bit. Easy conversation that didn't feel like an interrogation. She didn't ask where I was from. Just asked what I saw when I looked at the water. Escape, I said. She nodded like she understood completely. That night, I walked back to my room with something I hadn't carried in a long time. Curiosity. About her, about this place. About who I might be if I wasn't just the reliable one anymore. But then, around midnight, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I shouldn't have answered. But I did. Daniel? The voice said, uncertain and breathless. It was Mom. Her voice cracked like she'd been crying. I sat there on the edge of my bed, the phone pressed tight to my ear. The other hand clenched into a fist without me realizing it. I didn't say anything right away. I let her fill the space. "Your father and we didn't mean for things to come out that way," she started. "You just caught us off guard, that's all. We were planning it for months. We didn't know how to include you and—" I cut her off, my voice flat. "You didn't want to include me. That's different." She paused. "That's not true, Daniel." But it was, we both knew it. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the fog rolling over the bay. "You looked me in the eye and said I wasn't part of the family. You don't get to walk that back because things got uncomfortable afterward." "We didn't mean it like that," she whispered. We needed someone to stay, to be responsible. You've always been good at that. And that's all I am to you?" I snapped. "The guy who stays, who cleans up, who keeps everything glued together while everyone else gets to go live." She didn't respond, and that silence was louder than any scream. I hung up. No yelling. No slamming the phone. Just done. I set the phone face down on the table, the screen still glowing faintly in the dark, and laid back on the bed. The ceiling above me had a long crack running through it, and for the first time in my life, I understood the beauty of something broken, but still holding itself together. The next day, Riley was at the docks again. She waved when she saw me and invited me over without a word. She was painting a rusted-out boat half sunken in the corner of the marina. She said it reminded her of the past, useful once, left to rot now. "Sometimes you gotta let old things go to make space," she said, her brush dabbing the sky with a shade I couldn't name. "You know what I mean?" "Too well," I replied. We didn't talk much after that, just shared space. I liked that about her. She didn't dig. She just let things unfold naturally, like waves, like breath. A few more weeks passed. The holidays came and went. No texts, no calls. I worked Christmas Day by choice, helping Marlon with a busted generator for one of the boats. We shared a couple greasy burgers and a lukewarm soda afterward. It wasn't festive, but it was peaceful. By January, Riley had invited me to an open studio night at the middle school. I almost didn't go. The idea of being in a room full of strangers pretending to understand art felt off. But she insisted, said it wasn't about critics, it was about community. So I went. The place smelled like paint and floor wax. Kids' drawings lined the walls. Dinosaurs, cartoon characters, half-finished snowmen. I stuck out like a mechanic at a ballet recital, but Riley didn't seem to care. She introduced me to a few people, mostly teachers and local artists. No one asked about my past, just what I was working on now. That stuck with me. That night, she handed me a small notebook, blank pages, said it was time I started creating something of my own. I didn't know what to draw. I hadn't sketched anything since high school, but I liked the weight of it in my hand. It felt like possibility. One cold night I got a call, this time from Jake. I didn't pick up. He left a voicemail, said things weren't the same without me around, said Dad was drinking more, that Trevor and he couldn't stop arguing, said Mom barely came out of her room. Then he said something that made me freeze. "Maybe you were the only one holding us all together." I played the message twice, then deleted it. They wanted me back, not for me, but for them. Because things were messy and they missed the glue, but I wasn't their glue anymore. At work, I started staying late. Marlon gave me more responsibility. Ordering parts, dealing with customers, even training a new kid who barely knew a socket wrench from a screwdriver. I liked the rhythm. It made sense. Riley and I started having dinner once or twice a week. She cooked vegetarian stuff I pretended to understand. I brought stories from the shop that made her laugh so hard she'd spill wine on the table. She never pushed. She just showed up. That meant more than she knew. One night, I told her everything. Thanksgiving, the trip, the words, the silence after. She didn't try to fix it. She didn't offer cliches or sympathy. She just took my hand and said, "You're here now. That counts for something." That night, for the first time in months, I slept through the night, and I dreamed, not of them, but of water, and light, and something just out of reach, waiting to be made real. A few days later, Riley handed me a flyer she'd picked up from the community center. It was for a small local art show happening in March. Theme, resilience. Open to submissions from anyone. No experience required, just something honest. "You should submit something," she said, nudging me with her elbow as we sat on a bench near the water, sipping coffee from mismatched mugs. "I'm not an artist," I replied, half laughing, half deflecting. "You don't have to be," she shrugged. "You just have to feel something. You've been through a hell of a story. Tell it somehow. It doesn't need to be perfect." That night, I flipped open the little notebook she'd given me. The pages were still clean. I stared at the blankness for hours, pencil in hand, until finally I just started sketching. My hand moved almost without my permission. Lines, shapes, a silhouette of a man sitting on the edge of a dock with the weight of the ocean pressing against his back. Then came a cracked house, a frayed rope, a pair of boots walking away from a crooked path. I didn't show it to anyone, not yet, but I kept drawing, one page at a time. The more I let out, the more room I made inside, like draining a tank that had been rusting under pressure for years. By February, I'd filled half the notebook. I wasn't sure what I was doing, but it felt like truth, like breathing. One night after closing up the shop, Marlon tossed me a beer and leaned against the hood of an old Impala we'd been working on. "You're different, you know," he said, without looking at me. "When you first walked in here, you were like a coiled wire, ready to snap. Now you look like someone who knows where he's going." I took a swig, still figuring that out. "Good," he said. "Means you're paying attention." He didn't say more. Marlon wasn't the type, but that was enough. A few days later, I mailed in my submission to the art show. I called the piece Unloaded. A collection of sketches from my notebook, layered into a single spread with pencil, charcoal, and a little watercolor Riley had convinced me to try. It felt raw, unfinished, just like me. March rolled in with cold rain and gray skies, but I didn't mind. The show was held in an old converted warehouse near the edge of town. Rows of wire-hung canvases, photo prints, and sculptures lined the space, and I couldn't believe mine was one of them. Riley stood beside me, holding my hand tighter than usual as people walked by and stopped in front of my piece. I watched them quietly, strangers reading into something I'd poured myself into, finding pieces of their own stories in mine. A woman with silver hair dabbed at her eyes. A young guy snapped a photo with his phone. One man just stood there, staring, then nodded once and moved on. "Look at them," Riley whispered. "You gave them something they didn't know they needed." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. I just stood there, heart thudding, and let it wash over me. Later that night, back at the bait shop apartment, I found myself staring out the window again. The town lights shimmered against the wet pavement. I'd come so far from that snow-covered driveway in Tacoma, but something still lingered, a knot that refused to untangle. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. "Jake." This time I picked up. "Hey," he said. His voice was hesitant, different. "I heard about your art thing. Trevor saw it online. Said it looked deep." I didn't respond. "Listen, I know we screwed up," he continued. "I know we treated you like a tool, not a brother, and I don't expect you to forgive us. But I miss you, man." That part hit. "And Mom's not doing great," he added after a pause. "She hasn't cooked in weeks. Dad just sits in the garage half the day. It's like the house is waiting for you, and it doesn't know what to do now that you're gone." I closed my eyes. I could picture it all too clearly. The quiet tension, the frozen meals, the silence. "They're going to try again," Jake said. "The trip, Colorado. They booked it, but no one's talking. Everyone's walking on eggshells." "And," I said, "they want you to come. They think if you do, maybe it'll all be okay." I let out a slow breath. "But what about what I want, Jake? What if I don't care about holding it together anymore?" He didn't argue, just said, "I get it. Really, I do. But maybe just call Mom, okay? She asks about you every day." After we hung up, I sat on the bed, notebook in my lap, fingers resting on the soft edge of the page. I wasn't ready to go back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the part of me that still ached for some kind of closure, some kind of clean edge to all this mess, was louder than I expected. I picked up the pencil, began sketching again. A cabin in the snow. A mother sitting at a window. A man walking away, not running, just choosing his own direction. The next morning, I mailed a copy of the drawing to my mom's house with no note, just the image. I didn't know what they'd think, and for the first time, that was okay. A week passed, maybe more. I stopped keeping track. Work at the shop picked up. Tourists with busted axles, fishermen needing fast fixes before the early tides, even a classic car enthusiast passing through who needed a fuel pump replaced. Marlon kept calling me his guy, and I didn't hate it. It felt good to be needed for something clear and honest. Nothing layered with guilt or tied to a past I didn't ask for. One evening after closing, I was wiping down the front counter when Riley walked in. She had paint on her cheek and a paper bag in her hand. "Dinner," she said, dropping the bag on the counter. "You look like you haven't eaten a vegetable in 2 days." I grinned. 3, actually. We ate right there in the garage, her sitting on a rolling stool, me perched on the edge of the desk. She told me about her students, about a 6th grader who kept drawing trees with eyes in the trunks, and said they were watching people make bad decisions. I told her it sounded like a future novelist in the making. Then she asked, "Do you ever think about going back?" The question hung in the air, heavy and slow. I didn't answer at first. I leaned back, chewing slower, thinking. "I think about it," I admitted. But then I remember how I felt the moment I walked out, how it felt to finally breathe for myself, and I'm not sure I'm willing to give that up. She nodded. "You don't have to. But sometimes to move on, you gotta look back. Not to return, just to understand." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that last Thanksgiving, Dad's smirk, Mom's shrug, the way no one stood up for me. But I also thought about Jake's voice on the phone, cracked with regret, and the drawing I'd sent home, sitting somewhere in that quiet house now. Maybe on a fridge, maybe in a drawer, maybe already tossed in the trash. Midnight crept in. I got up, pulled on my jacket, and walked down to the marina. The tide was out, exposing mud and driftwood. The moon was bright enough to paint outlines on everything. The boats, the buildings, the long stretch of wooden dock. I took out my notebook, turned to a fresh page, and started sketching again. This time, it was different. I drew the house I grew up in, only now it had cracks in the siding, boards loose, windows fogged. I drew me, standing just outside the gate, holding a wrench in one hand and a suitcase in the other. But I didn't look sad. I looked steady, like someone who knew he couldn't fix everything and finally accepted that wasn't his job. By sunrise, I had 3 new pages filled. When I walked back to my room, my phone was buzzing. It was a text from Sophie. "Mom hung your drawing in the kitchen, right above the stove. She cried when it came in the mail, said you finally spoke without words." That hit harder than I expected. Sophie was the only one who used to bring me a slice of pie when Mom forgot. She remembered my birthday when no one else did. She was the one who noticed when I wasn't okay, even when I said I was. I typed back, "Tell her thanks, that I meant it." Then, almost against my better judgment, "How's she doing?" Sophie replied, "Better since the drawing. Dad, still stiff. Jake's trying. Everyone's still pretending, but at least they notice the silence now." That sat with me for a while. Maybe they were learning. Maybe not. But at least now, for the first time, they were sitting with their own mess, not expecting me to sweep it up. Later that day, Marlon handed me a thick envelope when I walked into the shop. "What's this?" "Mail, came with your name on it." Inside was a formal-looking invitation. Heavy cardstock, embossed edges, a return address from Colorado, a new cabin resort opening up near Estes Park. A family trip, it said. My name included this time. A handwritten note at the bottom read, "This time we got it wrong before. You were never outside the circle. We just didn't realize who was holding it up until you left. Come if you want. No guilt, no pressure, just family, trying to do better. Signed, Mom." It was the first time in my life she'd said something like that. I handed the envelope to Riley that night over dinner. She read it quietly, then passed it back without comment. "You going?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Well," she smiled softly, "if you go, you better bring back stories. And if you don't, you'll be here living. That's not nothing." That night, I stared at the invitation on my table long after the lights went out. I didn't feel angry or obligated. I just felt free to choose. And that freedom, that was everything. I didn't answer right away. The envelope stayed on my nightstand for days, unopened again, like I was waiting for it to turn into something else. A command, a demand, something I could resent. But it never changed. It was just an invitation, a choice, and that was new. The days in Redwood Bay went on. The chill of March melted into the teasing warmth of April. Riley and I kept having our late-night walks and quiet dinners. I kept sketching, not out of pain anymore, but curiosity, like I was learning how to speak in a new language, one made of shape and shadow instead of apologies and explanations. At the garage, I found myself teaching more than fixing. Marlon had me mentoring the 2 new kids he'd brought on. One of them, Jesse, reminded me of myself at 20. Eager, unsure, always second-guessing. I started showing him how to read an engine not just by sound, but by feel. How to spot a leak by scent. The old-school stuff most guys don't teach anymore. You ever think of opening your own place? Marlon asked me one Friday, wiping his hands after we closed up. Never let myself think that far ahead, I said. Well, maybe you should, he replied, tossing me the keys to lock up. You've got more than just skill, Daniel. You've got steadiness. Steadiness. That word stuck with me. It used to feel like a curse, like I was the only pillar in a crumbling house. Now, it felt like grounding, like something I could use for myself, not just to keep others standing. That weekend, I finally called my mom. Not for her, not for them, for me. She answered on the first ring. Daniel? Yeah, I said. Just calling to say I got the letter. Silence. Then soft. Thank you for reading it. I didn't call to promise anything, I continued. I'm not coming back to fix things. I'm not the safety net anymore. I know, she said. We're trying to fix ourselves now. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't emotional, but it was real. And that mattered more than anything. Sophie texted me the next day. A photo of my dad in the backyard, building a new shed. Alone. No instructions. No me. Just him and a toolbox. I stared at it for a long time. Riley and I drove out to a nearby ridge that evening. One of those spots only locals knew. You could see the whole bay from there. Boats like specks on the water. Rooftops lined up like puzzle pieces. The wind was sharp, but clean. We sat on the hood of her car sharing a thermos of coffee, and I told her everything. The call, the letter, the picture. She didn't react with advice. She never did. Just rested her head on my shoulder and said, You've already done the hardest part, Daniel. What's that? Letting go without shutting down. That sat with me. For the next few weeks, I focused on my art. Riley introduced me to a guy named Cal, who ran a little gallery in the next town over. Not a fancy place, more like a converted barn with good lighting, but it had a charm to it. Cal offered me a spot in their spring showcase after seeing my work. I hesitated. I'm just a mechanic with a pencil. No, Cal corrected me. You're a guy who saw a way out of his past and drew his way through it. People want to feel that, they need to. So I agreed. I put together 6 pieces. Sketches of the town, a few portraits, and one that scared me to submit. A self-portrait loosely drawn, sitting on a dock with a suitcase. The house behind me faded into mist. Titled, Stayed Too Long, Left Just in Time. The night of the show, Riley helped me hang the frames. Cal brought cheap wine and folding chairs. I stood near the back, heart pounding, trying not to look like a guy waiting for something to go wrong. But nothing did. People came. They looked. A woman stood in front of my self-portrait for nearly 10 minutes, then walked over and simply said, Thank you. That was my story too. It wasn't about validation. It wasn't even about pride. It was about finally being seen, fully, completely. Not as the helper or the fixer or the background guy, but as me. After the show, Riley kissed me outside the barn. Slow, steady, certain. I hope you know, she said against my cheek. You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that makes them comfortable. I'm learning, I said. She smiled. Good. A few days later, I opened my notebook again, but this time, not to draw. I wrote something, just a few lines. A sentence that came to me that night under the lights. I am not what they forgot. I am what I remembered. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to know. 2 weeks after the gallery night, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten again, this time from Jake. It was short, no guilt, no excuses, just a few lines about how things at home had shifted since I left. Trevor had taken over the Sunday chores. Mom was seeing a therapist. Dad had started attending AA meetings quietly, not telling anyone unless they asked. Sophie was still holding everyone together in her own way, like a quieter version of what I used to be. But the tone was different. It wasn't leaning on me or asking for anything, just sharing. Like a brother finally talking to another, not a lifeline grabbing for air. At the bottom, he wrote, If you ever want to come visit, you've got a couch. But if not, I'll see you when I see you. And either way, I'm proud of you. I sat on the back steps of the bait shop with that letter in hand, and Riley beside me, drinking coffee from a chipped mug. She didn't ask what it said. She didn't have to. She just put her hand on mine and gave it a light squeeze. That small gesture meant more than words ever could. That evening, as the wind picked up and the gulls circled overhead, I found myself walking to the dock again. My spot, the same one where I'd first watched Riley paint, where I'd spent countless nights with a pencil in one hand and a memory in the other. This time, though, I brought my camera. It was an old one I found in a thrift store. Not fancy, but it worked. I liked the way it made me slow down, made me frame things, made me look. I started shooting little moments. The splash of an oar breaking the water, rusted hooks hanging on a wall, Riley's curls catching the wind as she painted near the pier. Nothing special, but they felt like mine. The pictures started to pile up. I didn't share them at first, just kept them printed, stacked in a box under my bed. But one night, Riley pulled them out and flipped through them like sacred pages. She said they told a better story than words ever could. "You should show these," she said. "Let people see what you see." I hesitated, as always. What if they don't see anything? "They will," she said, "because these aren't just photos. They're proof that you were here, that you chose this, that you didn't vanish when you walked away from what broke you." That line stayed with me. I wrote it down later that night in the back of my sketchbook. The next morning, I made a small portfolio and dropped it off at Cal's gallery. Didn't say anything, just left it on his desk with a note. "If this belongs anywhere, you'll know." The following week, he called me. "You free next month?" he asked. "We've got a spot opening in our next show, mixed media. You and another guy from Portland, your camera work. It's got weight." "Are you sure?" "I wouldn't call if I wasn't," he said. "You've got a voice, Daniel, and it's time people heard it." So I said yes. The weeks leading up to the show were a blur. Between the garage and printing the photos, I barely slept. But I didn't feel tired. I felt awake, like my life finally had lines I'd drawn myself, not ones scribbled for me by someone else's needs. Riley helped me curate the best pieces. One photo in particular made us both pause. It was of my boots on the dock, the ocean stretching out beyond them. The sky was overcast, but the light cut through in a single beam across the water. I titled it, "Steady, Not Stuck." The night of the gallery came quickly. Cal had hung the photos beautifully, framed against dark gray panels, the spotlight soft and low. People wandered through the space, wine glasses in hand, murmuring to each other. This time I didn't hide in the back. I stood in front of my photos, next to Riley, letting myself be seen. A man in a fisherman's cap stopped at "Steady, Not Stuck" and turned to me. "This yours?" "Yeah," I said. He nodded. "Feels like someone who didn't run away, someone who just decided to stand somewhere else." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "That's exactly it." Riley squeezed my hand, her eyes glassy. "Told you they'd see it." Later, we stepped outside for air. The night was crisp, the sky clear for once. The bay shimmered under moonlight, and for a moment, everything felt still. That's when my phone buzzed. A photo. From Sophie. It was the kitchen wall. My drawing still hung there, framed now, with a tiny sticky note beside it that said, "Daniel's voice." No words, just that. I showed it to Riley. She smiled. "Looks like they're learning." I nodded slowly. "And I'm living." Spring settled into Redwood Bay like a slow breath. The gray skies warmed into blue. The wind softened, and wildflowers began creeping up between the cracks in the boardwalk. Everything felt alive again, including me. The morning after the gallery, I walked to the marina with my camera slung over one shoulder and a sketchbook under my arm. I stopped by the cafe Riley loved, grabbed 2 coffees, and met her on the ridge overlooking the town, the same spot where we'd once sat in silence just watching the world breathe. "I never said thank you," I told her, handing over her cup. "For what?" she asked. "For not asking me to be anything I wasn't ready to be," I said. "For just letting me become." She smiled, that quiet kind that always said more than words. "That's what real people do, Daniel. They wait for you to come home to yourself." I looked out at the horizon. There was no rush to go anywhere, no demand pulling me in 10 different directions, just stillness, a kind I'd never known in my old life. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't still feel that thread. Thin, but there, pulling back toward Tacoma. Not guilt, not obligation, just roots. And roots don't always mean you have to stay planted. Sometimes they just remind you where you started. A few days later, I made a decision. I packed a small duffel, a couple clean shirts, my notebook, the camera, and a worn pair of boots I'd nearly left behind when I first arrived. I didn't tell anyone, not even Riley. I just left a note on the kitchen table. Back in a couple days, not running, just revisiting. I drove through the winding roads that had once carried me away, this time going in reverse but with a completely different heart. I wasn't coming back to fix anything. I wasn't bringing my toolbox, just my presence, just my truth. When I pulled into the old neighborhood, I didn't feel that punch in the gut I'd expected. I felt peace, detached, but not cold, familiar, but not confining. The house looked smaller than I remembered. I knocked. My mom opened the door. She froze for a second, then stepped aside without a word. The air inside smelled like lemon cleaner and something baking. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. Dad was in the living room, glasses low on his nose, newspaper in hand. He looked up slowly and nodded. "Coffee?" my mom asked. I nodded back. We didn't talk about the trip, or the fight, or the months of silence. We just sat, sipping coffee, the photo I'd drawn still hanging above the stove, quietly watching us. Later, Sophie came by. She threw her arms around me without hesitation. No drama, no tears, just love. Trevor and Jake joined us that evening. We grilled burgers out back like we used to before everything got too heavy. I stayed for one night, slept on the old couch. The springs still creaked, the walls still hummed with pipes that hadn't been fixed. But I slept well, because it wasn't my job to fix it anymore. The next morning, Mom walked me out to my truck. "I'm glad you came," she said, eyes soft. "Even if just for a little." I smiled. "This time I chose to. That makes all the difference." She nodded. Then she handed me something. A small photo album. Inside were old pictures. Me holding Jake as a baby, me repainting the garage, me asleep at the kitchen table after some late-night homework session from years ago. On the inside cover was a note in her handwriting. "We see you now. Come back when you want to, not when we need you." That was all I ever needed to hear. I drove back to Redwood Bay with the windows down and the music low. Riley was painting on the dock when I got there. She looked up, waved, and smiled like I'd only been gone a minute. "You back?" she called. "I never really left," I said. That night we laid out all my newest sketches, the photos from the gallery, and a few fresh prints I'd made from recent shoots. She helped me sort them, choosing pieces for another exhibit. This time, not at Cal's. A bigger one, down in San Francisco. Riley had submitted my work on a whim. They said yes. I would have laughed once, thinking that could never happen to a guy like me. But I wasn't that guy anymore. I wasn't the stay-at-home fixer, the guilt magnet, the human band-aid for everyone else's mess. I was just Daniel, mechanic, photographer, sketchbook keeper, human being. And that was enough. So if you're still listening, still with me after all of this, I want to thank you, really thank you, for letting me tell my story, for giving me the space to find my voice. And if any part of this sounded like your life, if you've ever felt invisible, forgotten, or like the one always expected to hold it together, I see you, truly. Please, if this story meant something to you, subscribe to this channel. Not because some algorithm says you should, but because you matter, and maybe the next story will remind you of that too. And share with us. Have you ever walked away from something you thought defined you? What did you learn? What did you leave behind? And what did you find? Drop your story in the comments. Let's build something here, a place for people who are learning to choose themselves without shame. Because this isn't just about leaving, it's about becoming. And your voice deserves to be heard. We'll see you in the next one. Take care. For real.